Jagannatha Jaya Jagannatha Jaya Baladeva Jaya Subhadra Ma Jaya Gauranitai Jaya Gauranitai Jaya Gauranitai Jaya Gauranitai Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Gurudev 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parijakacharya Ashtotra Shri Srimad Abhaycharana Ravinda His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parijakacharya Ashtotra Shri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Grantraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Nitai Gaur Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Shri Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga Nitai Gaur Premanande. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udirayet Nashta Prayeshva Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Cha Nanda Gopa Kumaraya Govindaya Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. Welcome to this morning's Srimad Bhagavatam class. Thank you for coming. So with the blessings of Shri Shri Radha Gopinath, Shri Shri Jagannath Baldev Subhadra Maharani, Shri Shri Gaur Nitai, Srila Prabhupada, Srila Gurudev, I wish to offer my humble obeisances to all the Vaishnavas assembled here. I wish to take your blessings, and today let us speak and hear from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 21, Text number 2. Priyavratotanapādau Sutau swayambhuvasya vai Yatha dharmam jugupatu Saptadvipavatim mahim Priyavratotanapādau Sutau swayambhuvasya vai Yatha dharmam jugupatu Saptadvipavatim mahim. Prabhuji's. Priyavratotanapādau Priyavratotanapādau Sutau swayambhuvasya vai Yatha dharmam jugupatu Saptadvipavatim mahim. Priyavratotanapādau Sutau swayambhuvasya vai Yatha dharmam jugupatu Saptadvipavatim mahim. Okay. Let us look at the word-to-word meaning. Priyavrata, Maharaj Priyavrata, Uttanapādau and Maharaj Uttanapada, Sutau, the two sons, Swayambhuvasya, of Swayambhuva Manu, Vai, indeed, Yatha, according to, Dharmam, religious principles, Jugupatu, ruled, Saptadvipavatim, consisting of 7 islands, Mahim, the world. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. The two great sons of Swayambhuva Manu, Priyavrata and Uttanapada, rule the world, consisting of 7 islands, just according to religious principles. Please repeat. The two great sons of Swayambhuva Manu, Priyavrata and Uttanapada, rule the world, consisting of 7 islands, just according to religious principles. Let us hear the purport. Srimad Bhagavatam is also a history of the great rulers of different parts of the universe. In this verse, the names of Priyavrata and Uttanapada, sons of Swayambhuva, are mentioned. They rule this earth, which is divided into 7 islands. These 7 islands are still current as Asia, Europe, Africa, America, Australia, and the North and South Poles. There is no chronological history of all the Indian kings in Srimad Bhagavatam, but the deeds of the most important kings such as Priyavrata and Uttanapada and many others like Lord Ramachandra and Maharaj Yudhishthira are recorded because the activities of such pious kings are worth hearing. People may benefit by studying their histories. Jai. Let us do Mangalacharan. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Ena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Ena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Gurum Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Bhutair Mahadbe Aima Puro Vibhu Nirmayashete Yadamoshu Purusha Bhungter Gunamsho Dasashodasatmaka Solang Krishishta Bhagavan Vachamsi Me Shri Krishna Sharanam Sharanagatam Katha Amritam Satata Pibatam Bhakti Vedanta Marga Panktanam Sarvaloka Rishi Deva Janna Prasannam Sarvaloka Rishi Deva Janna Prasannam. Hare Krishna. So welcome once again to this morning's Srimad Bhagavatam class. So let us hear the verse once more. Priyavrato tana padau sutau swayam bhuvasya vai yatha dharmam jugupatu saptadvipavatim mahim. The two great sons of Swayambhuva Manu, Priyavrata and Uttanapada, ruled the world consisting of 7 islands, just according to religious principles. So we have just started a new chapter, chapter 21 in Canto 3, and today is just the text number 2. So here we see that the conversation between Vidura and Maitreya Muni is continuing. So we saw how in chapter 20, Vidura and Maitreya were having a conversation, and we heard about the pastime of Lord Varahadev, and then about the two doorkeepers, Jay and Vijay, how they were cursed, and then all the Leela that happened after that. And then we came up to seeing how Lord Brahma started creating and all his different creations. So after hearing about all the different creations of Lord Brahma, Vidura was now eager to hear more. So he wanted to hear more about the creations of Lord Brahma from Maitreya Muni. And he asks Maitreya Muni to explain more about the descendants of Swayambhuva Manu. So we know that Swayambhuva Manu is the first Manu who appeared from the body of Lord Brahma himself. So now Vidura wants to hear about his progeny. What happened? What are all the descendants who appeared, and what did they do? What were their activities? So Vidura is asking. So we'll just rewind a little bit to the chapters 12 and 13 of Canto 3, where we see how when Lord Brahma was creating, after he created so many demigods, the demons, then all the sages, and all many beautiful things that Lord Brahma created. But after all that, still he realized that the population had not increased. There was nothing happening, like all his creations were there, but the generations, they were not coming forth. So then what happened? As Lord Brahma was meditating, he was meditating on the supreme power, on the supreme Lord within him. And at that time, two bodies emerged from Lord Brahma. One took the form of a male and one took the form of a female. So the body that took the form of a male was Swayambhuva Manu, and the female form was Shata Rupa. So as soon as these two forms appeared from the body of Lord Brahma, what did they do? They offered obeisances to Lord Brahma and they took his blessings. And then Lord Brahma blessed them and he said, now both of you begin to engage in a relationship and let the progeny continue from you. So, following the instructions of Lord Brahma, Swayambhuva Manu and Shatarupa engaged in a sexual relationship, and then they had 5 children, that is 2 sons and 3 daughters. So the 2 sons were Priyavrata and Uttanapada, and the 3 daughters were Akuti, Devahuti and Prasuti. So we see that Swayambhuva Manu, he handed over his daughters in marriage to the sages, to 3 different sages. So Akuti was married to Ruchi, to sage Ruchi, and then Devahuti was married to sage Kardama Muni, and Prasuti was married to Daksha. So in this chapter, chapter 21 of Canto 3, we will begin to hear more about the pastime of Devahuti and Kardama Muni, of how they met, how they were married, and then how Kapiladev was born as their son, and then his instructions on devotional service. So all that we will see in chapter 21. So in this verse, that is text number 2, Vidura is mentioning about the two sons of Swayambhuva Manu. So he is mentioning about Priyavrata Maharaj and Uttana Pada. And he wants to hear more about them. So today we will try to reflect and meditate on some of the activities of these two great kings, Priyavrata Maharaj and Uttanapada, and let us see what we can learn from the pages of Srimad Bhagavatam. And it is said that these two kings were specifically empowered by the Supreme Lord, and therefore they were very competent in ruling the universe and in protecting their citizens just according to religious principles. So that is what we see in this verse. So Priyavrata was the first son and Uttanapada was the second son. But even though Uttanapada was the second son, we see that Maitreya Muni is eager to speak about him very soon. So Srila Prabhupada explains that Maitreya Muni wanted to immediately go into the pastime of who? Dhruva Maharaj, who was the son of Uttanapada. And since Maitreya Muni was eager to speak about the activities of Dhruva Maharaj, he started speaking about Uttanapada first in Canto 4. So there we see a beautiful pastime of Dhruva Maharaj and all that we can learn from him. And Srila Prabhupada mentions that from the pious actions of Dhruva Maharaj, one can learn how to detach himself from material possessions and how we can enhance our devotional service by severe austerities. And then he says that the example of Dhruva Maharaj's austerities can immediately generate a feeling of devotional service in the hearts of the hearers. So following the footsteps of Maitreya Muni, we will also try to speak and hear about Dhruva Maharaj and Uttanapada first. So King Uttanapada, he had two queens, Suniti and Suruchi. And the first queen, Suniti's son was Dhruva Maharaj and Suruchi's son was Uttama. Now this queen Suruchi was more dear to Uttanapada. So one day what happened when Suruchi's son Uttama was sitting on Maharaj Uttanapada's lap and he was playing. And then little Dhruva, who was only about 5 years old, he also wanted to sit on the lap of Uttanapada, his dad. But then what happened at that time? Suruchi, she stopped him. She stopped him from getting onto his dad's lap and sitting there and playing with him. And Suruchi said that, no, you cannot do this because you are not born from my womb. She said, and if you have to sit on your dad's lap, you have to pray to the Supreme Lord, get his benedictions, and then you have to be born from my womb, and then you can sit on your dad's lap. So Suruchi was a little bit, she was trying to express her possessive feelings of her son and of her husband that way. And then what happened? Dhruva Maharaj, the little boy, he got so upset and he ran to his mum, Suniti, and he started crying and he said, how is this? I want to sit on my dad's lap. How can Suruchi, my stepmother, say this to me? And he was so very completely hurt. And at that time, Mother Suniti advised him. And she said, don't worry, all that you can do now is to pray to the Supreme Lord. So then what happened? Dhruva Maharaj, he asked, okay, who is this God? Where can I find him? Who is the Supreme Lord? And then Suniti said, all that I have heard is that usually sages and saints, when they want to meditate, when they want to know about the Supreme Lord, they usually go to the forest. So on hearing this, what did Dhruva Maharaj do? He also ran away to the forest. He thought that he can go there and he can find the Supreme Lord. So he was searching intensely and he was asking, where is God? Where can I find him? So in that way, this little boy, with all his innocence and with that intense feeling of finding the supreme power, the Supreme Lord, he ran into the forest. And at the same time, what does Sri Krishna do when he knows that his devotee is trying to search for him? He arranges everything. So he arranged for Dhruva's spiritual master, Narada Muni, to appear there. So Narada Muni, he appeared, and then he goes and he instructs Dhruva Maharaj. So Narada Muni first said, what is this? You're just a little boy. Don't take this so seriously. Just because your stepmom said something, don't take it to heart. You can just play, and that is your age. Why have you come into this forest? Come on, go home. But then Dhruva was not willing to listen to that. He was determined. He said, no, I have come here to find God. I have come here to find the Supreme Lord. And I want a kingdom that is greater than my dad, that is greater than Uttanapada, or even greater than my grandfather, Lord Brahma. So saying this, Dhruva was determined to be there. And at that time, then Narad Muni, even though he knew that he was just a little boy and he's having these material desires, Narad Muni then instructed him how he can find the Supreme Lord, how he can take his darshan. So Narad Muni first, he asks Dhruva to go to Madhuvana, that is the forest called Madhuvana, which is on the banks of river Yamuna. And then he says, by practicing Ashtanga Yoga and different breathing exercises and doing all this, you can slowly achieve the darshan of the Supreme Lord by practicing bhakti, by meditating on him within your heart. And then at this point, Narad Muni begins to beautifully describe the beauty of the Supreme Lord as he is speaking to Dhruva. So he says, Prasadhabhimukam shashvat prasanna vadanekshanam sunasam subhruvam charu kapolam surasundaram. So he says, the Lord's face is perpetually very beautiful and pleasing in attitude. To the devotees who see him, he appears never to be displeased, and he is always prepared to award benedictions to them. His eyes, his nicely decorated eyebrows, his raised nose, and his broad forehead are all very beautiful. He is more beautiful than all the demigods. So very nicely, Narad Muni is appealing to Dhruva Maharaj by describing the beauty of Sri Krishna. And then he says, Tarunam Ramaniyangam Arunoshtekshanaadharam Pranatashrayanam Rimnam Sharanyam Karunarnavam. So here he says that the Lord is always youthful. He is always fresh, he is young, and his limbs are all so properly formed without any defect. They are all so perfect. And then his eyes and lips are pinkish, just like the rising sun. And he is always prepared to give shelter to whoever is surrendering unto him. And then he says that the Lord is an ocean of mercy. That is Karunarnavam. Karuna is mercy. Arnavam means ocean. So he is an ocean of mercy. So like this, Narad Muni is describing the beauty of the Supreme Lord. And then he says that the Lord has the mark of Shrivatsa on his chest, and then he's wearing a Kaustuba gem, and his body is bluish, and he's wearing shining yellow garments, and he's wearing a beautiful helmet, and he's holding Shankha, Chakra, Gada and Padma, and he's wearing all different necklaces, beautiful armlets, bangles, golden anklets. Like this, he is giving a beautiful darshan of Lord Vishnu to Dhruva Maharaj. And he's saying that the Lord is always peaceful, calm and quiet, and he's very pleasing to the eyes and the mind. So by hearing all this, Dhruva Maharaj is getting more attracted. Now he really wants to see who is the Supreme Lord, who is so beautiful. And so what happens? He begins to do intense austerities. So Dhruva Maharaj immediately, he goes to this forest of Madhuvana. And before that, Narad Muni also gave him this beautiful mantra to meditate on Lord Krishna. And what is that mantra? Which we chant every day at the beginning of Bhagavatam class. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So Narad Muni, he gave this beautiful 12-syllable mantra for worshipping Lord Krishna. And then he also gives him various different instructions on how to worship the Lord. What are the different offerings that we can make? Flowers and then fruits and all the beautiful things that we can offer to the Supreme Lord. Like this, Narad Muni explains him about the path of bhakti, the path of devotional service. So after hearing all this, Dhruva Maharaj is now intensely desiring to see Krishna. Just as when we hear more and more about Sri Krishna, we want to, take his shelter. We want to see him. We want to serve him. And how can we see him? Only by hearing about him. So in one of the classes we were hearing how the sense of hearing is so important. It is the first one that develops and it is the last one that leaves our body, the sense of hearing, and how it is very important to hear Krishna Katha, to hear about Sri Krishna. So Dhruva Maharaj then, he begins to perform intense austerities. So for the first few days, he is eating only different fruits and berries. And then after a few weeks, he is drinking only water. Then after that, he is only inhaling air. He's not even eating anything. And then he is standing on one leg. And then he's practicing Ashtanga Yoga. That is the different yogic postures, all that. And then he's practicing different breathing exercises. He's doing all this and he is meditating on the Supreme Lord. And we also hear that how this process is very, very difficult. It is not easy, the path of Ashtanga yoga. And we might be practicing yoga, and some of us who practice, we know that it is challenging if we have to do it every day and to master all those yogic postures. It is very, very difficult. And that's why Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has given us this very easy process of just chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So Dhruva Maharaj, as following the instructions of Narad Muni, he did all these austerities. And then what happened? The Supreme Lord appeared before him and gave him his personal darshan. And just on seeing the Supreme Lord, Dhruva Maharaj, he got a little bit agitated. He lost his composure. Imagine somebody is doing so much austerities and the Lord just appears in front of you. How would you feel? You would be like, what? Like that. And then what did the Supreme Lord do? He touched his conch on the head of Dhruva Maharaj. And then at that place we hear this beautiful verse. Taddarshanena gata sadva sakshita avandatangam vinamaya dandavat Drigbhyam prapasyan prapiban ivarbakas chumban ivasyena bujairivashlishan. So Dhruva Maharaj, out of his ecstasy, he just fell like a rod and he offered Dandavat pranams to the Supreme Lord Sri Vishnu who appeared before him. And he just looked at the Lord as if he was drinking the Lord's beauty with his eyes. And then he was just imagining as if he's kissing the Lord's lotus feet and as if he's embracing the Lord with his arms. So like this, Dhruva Maharaj was just completely absorbed in seeing the Supreme Lord who appeared before him. And then after that, Dhruva Maharaj, he offers beautiful prayers. And then the Lord blessed him and he gave him the whole a planet called as Dhruva Loka. So he fulfilled Dhruva Maharaj's desires, his wishes. And then at this time also parallelly what happened? Uttanapada was so worried. He was anxious about his son, what happened, and he was feeling so regretful that he made such a big mistake by not showing his affection to his son. But then Narad Muni, he came to Uttanapada and he said, don't worry, your son is being looked after by the Supreme Lord himself. So then, after all this, then when Dhruva Maharaj, when he went back to Uttanapada, Uttanapada just welcomed him with so much affection. And then realizing his mistake, he said he apologizes to Dhruva Maharaj, and then later on he hands over his the whole world, all his kingdom, everything to Dhruva Maharaj, and then Uttanapada just retires. So we might be wondering what is so special about Uttanapada in this. But we can see that just by the son's achievement, by Dhruva Maharaj's glories, Uttanapada is also being still spoken about today. And by the Lord's arrangement, Uttanapada's son Dhruva Maharaj became so glorious, and we can learn so much about devotional service from him. So such is the glory of a father whose son was such a wonderful devotee of the Supreme Lord. So we will now move into Priyavrata Maharaj, that is the first son of Swayambhuva Manu. So in Canto 5, Chapter 1, we see a beautiful conversation between Parikshit Maharaj and Shukadev Goswami. So here Shukadev Goswami speaks about the life and activities of Priyavrata Maharaj. So Priyavrata Maharaj was a self-realized soul. He was already practicing bhakti. He was immersed in the Lord's thoughts all the time. And he was completely self-controlled, and he was on his own path of just meditating on the Lord, serving him, and he was a very pure soul. And that time, once what happened, his father, Swayambhuva Manu, he asked Priyavrata Maharaj to take charge of ruling the whole world. But at this time, Priyavrata, Prince Priyavrata, he had not yet become the king. So Prince Priyavrata, he was a little bit apprehensive, because he thought, if I start ruling the world and if I get into all this material life and entanglements again, then I might deviate from my path of bhakti. So he was a little bit doubtful. But at the same time, he couldn't reject his dad's orders. So feeling this way, he was just wondering what to do. And at that time, what happens? Lord Brahma arrived there personally from Satyaloka. So it is said that whenever we are trying to seek for some answers from the Lord, and when we sincerely meditate, then the Lord makes arrangements so that we get the answers for whatever we are seeking. So Lord Brahma, he arrived there on his beautiful swan. And just as he arrived, all the residents of Gandharvaloka, Siddhaloka, Sadhyaloka, Charanaloka, so all these celestial beings, the demigods, the sages, everyone also arrived on the sky, and they were all offering worship to Lord Brahma. And at this point, it looked like as if Lord Brahma was a full moon, and as if all of them were like the stars, shining stars around him. So in such a beautiful setting at the border of Gandhamadana hill, so that's where Priyavrata Maharaj was sitting. And there Lord Brahma arrived, and he started speaking to him. And he instructs Priyavrata Maharaj. And he says how that one should carry out the orders of the Supreme Lord. And he speaks about the Varnashrama Dharma. So that is one of the main instructions that we hear in this part of Srimad Bhagavatam, where Lord Brahma is speaking about the Varnashram Dharma. And Srila Prabhupada also elaborates very much on this, because Priyavrata Maharaj didn't want to get entangled into the material life. But Lord Brahma is instructing how, by constantly keeping the Lord in our heart, by constantly serving the Supreme Lord, how we can even spiritualize our material life. So then there is no distinction between what is material and what is spiritual, but we just simply carry out the orders of our superiors. So here, Srila Prabhupada explains about the importance of following the Varnashram system, which is very scientific. So he says that it is stated in the Vishnu Purana, Varnashrama charavata purushena parapuman Vishnur aradhyate panta nanyat tattosha karanam. So he says that the Supreme Lord, Vishnu, is worshipped by proper execution of prescribed duties in the system of Varna and Ashrama. There is no other way to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One must be situated in the institution of the 4 Varnas and Ashramas. So we know that the 4 Varnas, which is Brahmana, Kshatriya, Shudra, Vaishya and Shudra, which is a division of the society according to our occupation. And then the 4 ashrams, Brahmacharya, Grahastha, Vanaprastha and Sannyasa. So all this is very scientifically arranged so that throughout our life we can meditate on the Lord, we can keep serving Him, no matter in what position we are in. Wherever we are, we simply serve the Lord. And that is our position. So Lord Brahma advises Priyavrata Maharaj and he says that the Lord gives us specific bodies and according to that we experience happiness and distress. So just like a soul might be in the body of an elephant or in the body of an ant or in the body of a butterfly, and according to that, that soul has to execute his dharma. So even as humans, we are not all just one homogenic mix. We are all different. We have, like between men and women, there is so much difference. And between us, we are also different. Why? Because that is the Lord's creation. We can't all have the same natures. But according to whatever is our nature, according to that we try to serve the Lord. We try to learn from our acharyas. And that way, once we realize that we are simply a servant of Sri Krishna, then no matter whatever we are, whatever differences we have, those things dissipate away. And then we just simply serve the Supreme Lord. So Lord Brahma says that how, by following the Varnashram system, one can control one's senses in a very progressive way. Because ultimately for bhakti, what we need is controlling our senses. And that is not so easy, which is the most challenging thing for any human being. So that is why we have these different ashramas. So in the grihasthashram, what happens? A person can slowly conquer his or her senses. And that way what happens, we hear in Bhagavatam, that a person becomes like a king in a fortress. He is protected from the different enemies who can attack him. So here Lord Brahma says that instead of just going to the forest and just renouncing or, just falsely renouncing, while one's senses might still be attacking a person and while a person might still be caught by the grip of all the senses that are overpowering him, because we still have our mind and the 5 senses, and it is said that they are like the 6 co-wives of a person. So when all that is still controlling a person, instead of just falsely giving up and going away, what does Lord Brahma say? He's saying that it is better to engage your senses in the service of the Lord. And in the grihasthashram, it provides a perfect environment for a man or a woman to engage their senses so that they are in a loving relationship. The husband and the wife, they serve each other and then they serve the Supreme Lord together as a couple. So when they do all that, what happens? Slowly, slowly, all their lusty desires, which is so inherent, which is natural, no one can just conquer them so easily. Then what happens? All this subsides with time. Then one's renunciation can be perfect at the end when they are ready to move on in their life and when they are ready to renounce internally or externally as well. So we see that after hearing about all this from Lord Brahma, Priyavrata Maharaj, then he decides, he decides to take charge of his kingdom, of the kingdom of his father, Swayambhuva Manu. And he also marries Barhishmati, who is the daughter of Prajapati named Vishwakarma. So Barhishmati was the beautiful king of Priyavrata. And Priyavrata Maharaj, he loved his wife so dearly because she would dress up so beautifully, and the way she would walk and the way she would speak, the way she would glance at her husband, the way she would serve him. All this was very encouraging for Priyavrata Maharaj. And Srila Prabhupada explains that for a person who is, who's leading a material life until they really completely turn into spiritual life, how a wife has to inspire the husband. So Srila Prabhupada explains that in one of these purports that Barhishmati was always expert in pleasing her husband by properly dressing herself and by properly, acting, by being very submissive, by looking after him, by caring for him. So by doing all this, she conquered the heart of her husband. And he was also very dearly, engaged in a relationship with her. And at the same time, he did not get carried away. He still held the Supreme Lord in his heart all the time. And he was always meditating and he was always serving him with all sincerity. And then what happens? We hear that once Priyavrata Maharaj, he drove his chariot behind the sun. And then the rims of his chariot wheels, they created impressions that later became the 7 oceans and the 7 islands, which are Jambu, Plaksha, Salmali, Kusha, Krauncha, Shaka, and Pushkara. So that is what we heard in today's verse as well, that how these 2 kings, they ruled over all these 7 islands. So Priyavrata Maharaj, after enjoying all the material opulences that he had, the big kingdom, his beautiful wife, and then they had 10 children. So all this, after enjoying all this for many thousands of years, at the end, he did realize that he got a bit engrossed in his material life as well. Even though he was serving the Lord, he did realize that he became a bit too attached to his wife. So all this we can learn from Srimad Bhagavatam. How to remain like that drop of water on a lotus without getting too attached to our family. We have our responsibilities. We have to give our love and care. We have to look after each other. But at the same time, we don't become too attached and too possessive to the extent that we forget Sri Krishna. So we learn about all this from these great kings. And then what happens? Priyavrata Maharaj, at the end, he gave up his kingdom, he gave everything to his sons, and then he divided all his possessions amongst all his sons. and then he immersed completely in spiritual life, and he renounced, and then he went back to Godhead. So basically what we learn from today's verse, that is from Priyavrata Maharaj, Uttanapada, all these great kings, ultimately we learn the path of bhakti from Dhruva Maharaj. From all of them, what do we learn is how to be always immersed in serving Sri Krishna. And another great king from whom we can learn about how to engage our senses, because that is another important point that we saw in today's discussion about controlling one's senses. It is not independently possible to control our senses. But what do? We engage our senses in the service of Krishna. So let us pray to Shri Radha Gopinath that we will endeavor and we will sincerely try to engage our senses in serving them. Just like Maharaj Ambarish, who engaged his mind on meditating on the Supreme Lord, his hands in cleaning the temple of the Lord, his words in describing the glories of the Lord, his ears in hearing about the Lord, and then he would walk to the temples using his legs, with his head in bowing down to the Lord, then his tongue in tasting the prasada, that is remnants of what Krishna has eaten, then his sense of smell in smelling the tulsi and flowers offered to the Lord, then the sense of touch in touching the bodies of the devotees, and all his desires were engaged in serving Sri Krishna. So let us hear this beautiful verse and we will conclude. Savai mana Krishna padara vindayor vachamsi vaikunta gunanu varnane karau harer mandiramarjanadishu Shrutim chakarachuta satkatodhaye Mukundalingalaya darshane drishau Tadbritya gatra sparshenga sangamam Granam cha tatpada saroja saurabhe Shrimad tulasya rasanam tadarpite Padau hare kshetra padanusarpane Shiro rishikesha padabhivandane Kamam cha dasye natu kama kamyaya Yatottama shloka jana shrayaratihi. Jai Grantraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Shri Radha Gopinath Bhagwan ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda ki, Nitai Gaur Premanande.